This is HuffPost Live. I'm Caitlin Becker. We dress it up in cutesy language like birds and bees, ban it from schools, and of course play it on MTV. But as a culture, we avoid simply talking to kids about sex. Even though parents teach their children how to ride bikes and show them good manners, it's taboo to consider actually teaching teenagers how to have good or even safe sex. But should we? Joining us to discuss this is Deborah Roffman, the author of Talk to Me First, Everything You Need to Know to Become Your Kid's Go-To Person About Sex, John Hotchkiss, creator of This versus That Show.com, Mo Beasley, former sex educator at the Children's Aid Society and former peer counselor at Planned Parenthood. And joining me on set is Elizabeth Pearl, our editor here at HuffPost Teen. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
So we want to start off with a tweet. At ZGEMTV says, why do people conceptualize sex ed as, quote, the talk, rather than a series of conversations over the years tailored to a child's maturity? And Deborah, I want to go to you first on this. Where do you stand on this concept of a talk? Because it stands to reason that it's sort of a note of maturity that when, a teen or a child is old enough to start having the talk, then they're sort of becoming an adult. But should it be just one conversation?
The fact that we still use that phrase, the talk, and imply just what you said, which is this is a one sit down conversation, really tells us a lot about how we think about sexuality in this culture. Children are sexual beings from birth on. The first thing we do is name their gender, and that becomes an important part of who they are as sexual human beings. So kids should be learning about this subject the way they learn about every other subject, in context with parents answering questions, offering information, and helping kids pull it all together. And that's a series of talks, and it's also important for us to connect those talks to other talks that we have with kids. For example, about values and relationships, it's in decision making. It's all part of the package, and it needs to be, as we've said, both of us, an ongoing conversation. The fact that we don't do that, if I had half an hour, I could prove it to you, can be traced back to the Puritans, who landed in this country in 1620, which is 393 years ago. Time to give that up and establish new paradigms.
So are we just, as a culture, just so ingrained to think that talking about sex with teens and children is just wrong? And I know you addressed this in a series of blogs that you wrote for the Huffington Post, Down with the Talk. Why is it still so cringeworthy? Is it more for parents or for kids that are uncomfortable having this conversation?
If you think about it, I know when I was growing up, whenever this subject came up in my family life, everybody got tense. So our first connection with this subject is often the feeling of anxiety. And anxiety, we don't like anxiety. If no one helps us process it, we're stuck with it. This subject gets connected with that very uncomfortable feeling, so that even when parents even think about bringing up these subjects with their kids, they start to get anxious. So my job as a sexuality educator, particularly when I'm working with parents, is to help them relax, drop their shoulders, understand that this subject is no different than any other subject. We don't think twice about teaching our children information about any other important subject, so that we need to give up this double standard that we've applied to this subject that's centuries old.
I want to read a comment from someone in our community. CJ Earl says, sadly, too many people cannot recognize the reality of life as it actually is. Teenagers have always had sex, no matter what the prevailing social climate or moral attitudes. It is just how young people make the transition from childhood into adulthood. And Liz, you're editor here at HuffPost Teen. You can kind of tap into their consciousness a little bit. If we're not having these conversations at home and teaching our kids about sex, they're still learning about it, right? Where are they getting their info?
Right. I mean, if you look at it, like if their parents aren't talking about it, they can go to, let's see, their friends who know nothing. They can, turn to their educators who may or may not be able to give them information depending on how politicians feel that day. Or they can go to like 1,000 different websites that no matter how many blockers you put up as a parent to try to prevent them from seeing it, they're going to find it. So really what what is a more reliable place for them to go for information where they're going to get the right warnings they need for when they're ready to have sex?
There's
Whatever that term is.
There's a tweet coming in from at ChanceGTV who says, I really wish MTV would start like a safe sex campaign and a sex education fund for public schools instead of glorifying being a teen mom. With media being what it is, are teens getting the wrong messages about sex?
You know, I don't actually believe that shows like Teen Mom or, other reality shows that talk about teen pregnancy necessarily are going to promote it. I actually think it gives them a nice view into what that life could be like and how hard it can be. I also think we don't give teens enough credit. They're smart. They understand what they're seeing, and that's sometimes is the difference between fantasy and reality. Where I think we have problems is obviously like pornography, and I think that in the sex ed talk with parents, I think they need to also talk about porn and make sure that teens understand that it is not a representation of reality at all. It is a fantasy.
We have a comment coming in from ADubs1988 who says, my parents taught me about safe sex. I didn't know until I was almost an adult that not all kids get the actual talk. So we're really talking about two different ends of the spectrum here. And there have been some blogs on the Huffington Post recently, this one in particular. How do you feel about sex and teenage sleepovers? And then another one that's going around the internet, dear daughter, I hope you have awesome sex. So now we're going so far in the other direction where it almost sounds like we're encouraging our children to have frequent and good sex. As dads, John and Mo, how do you feel about that?
I want to scream. I want to scream out. I know I shouldn't scream, but I have a 13-year-old daughter, and look, here's the thing. I'm liberal, and I think, and I made a television series for the Playboy TV channel about myths about sexuality, and so I personally have no problems with sex and pornography or any of those myriads of things that relate to sexuality. However, here's what I'm going to say, that at 13 years old, kids make horrible, horrible decisions, and they don't understand the consequences of their horrible decisions. And we compound it by not giving them enough information. And why do we compound it? We do it because over the course of our lives and our parents' lives and my grandparents' lives, their religious institutions, their communities, their government have all told them that sex is bad, that you shouldn't do it, and that you should wait, and that sex should only happen between married adults who should do it reluctantly at night with the lights off, under the covers, but only if there isn't a rerun on of Walker, Texas Ranger, right? And so we've been bred into our DNA the uncomfortableness of sexuality. And the idea of breaking that pattern is going to take a very long time. It's the same reason why any of us can't lose weight. Not that anyone here in particular has to, but it's a habit that we've gotten into over 30 or 40 years. We feel anxiety, we eat, right? Whatever it is, we eat, and we can't break that habit. Now we've been bred into us in the same kind of way, this habit of sex is bad, sex is awkward, sex is uncomfortable, don't do it. And it's going to take, I was thinking about it yesterday, it's going to take 100 years for us to fix this.
Can I jump in here for a second?
To echo that point, one of our commenters says, my parents didn't give me the talk because they thought that would make me interested in actually having sex. Flawed parenting. There's this fear factor from the parental side, and there's a pervasive idea of dad with the shotgun and I will be totally honest, the first guy that ever picked me up, my dad absolutely had the shotgun, cleaning it on the coffee table. It was horrifying for me. But Mo, where do you draw the line between protecting your kids and making sure they're safe and not terrifying them?
Wow, where do you draw the line? That's a great question. Well, you start early. I think, again, Jonathan said that you start early so that by the time they get to that place where a partner is showing up at the door, we've already understood where we stand about sex. And because sex is one of the most amazing things that can happen to any of us. And so I think that's where we start with our children. That's where I start with I have 3 girls. So we I start from the place of this is one of the most amazing things you could ever have happen to you. So you draw the line where it stops becoming amazing. And then that's, and how does it stop? How does it become awful? Somebody who's not considerate of you, someone who doesn't care about you, and be real. We're men. So with our daughters, Jonathan, we have to be straight about how men move in the world with sex. And let our daughters know that it's almost totally different from how they move with it. So be aware of it so that, again, they can set the line. They draw the line as to what is good and what is not good about sex and their sexuality. Again, we have to, my job is to nurture that for them, give them the information, again, as it is age appropriate and as they come to me. My 6-year-old asked me last week, how did you and mommy make me? And I had to say, because we had sex. And, but again, when they start asking the questions, you got to start coming up with honest answers and comfortable answers. Because again, we're filled with fear, and I guess you got to keep fear out of the conversation as much as possible, which is not an easy thing to do. It is frightening as a parent to think about the worst things that can happen to your children with sex. But again, when the fear shows up, you got to press that down and again and move in that place of this is one of the most amazing things that can ever happen to you in your life. This is how we keep it amazing.
John, I see you trying to jump in. Go ahead, jump in there.
Here's the thing I was going to say is that the truth is that I've left most of these conversations to my wife, right? I just think that she communicates better to my little girl about this than I do, and quite frankly, it gives me the willies to have to think about it. And although I would like for her to have the proper education and the proper information, and I'm totally in favor of her getting it, here's the thing that I worry about, is that because kids make dumb decisions, right? If you were to go out and drink too much, you don't end up having a baby, right? If you don't study for a test and you fail it, you don't end up with a baby. If you took your parents' car without permission, as kids perhaps might do, and you were to drive too fast or get pulled over by the police or, God forbid, have an accident, you don't end up with a baby. However, if you have sex, unprotected sex, when you're a child, it's very possible you could end up with a baby. And believe me, babies are good. People love babies, right? But they don't love babies when they belong to a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old mother. And I just fear that because we know that kids make dumb and dopey decisions, that it's going to follow through as you would expect in this area. And so I would like for kids to have information, but my fear is that kids will make bad decisions, and that makes me uncomfortable.
But doesn't that, that operating from this place of fear, isn't that part of the problem, Liz? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love, I forget which one of you brought up fear, but I think that that's a great way to look at this. I think that teens are taught culturally that sex is a really scary thing. So when, I think it's a parent's responsibility to make sure that they're not associating sex with fear, because when that is when bad decisions happen, when they're scared. So parents need to talk to them, about everything they want, like literally answer all of their questions. Also doing that will make them not feel shame about it. I think it's really important that they not feel embarrassed and they don't feel shame, because when they stop associating all of those emotions with sex, that's when they're going to be able to make good decisions.
And Deborah, I'd love you to jump in here with this idea, this fear-based parenting. And it's such a reasonable fear. It's such a reasonable fear for a parent to not want your child to have a baby too early or, God forbid, get a disease. But before I have you jump in, this comment from CJ Earl says, speaking as a 68-year-old grandfather, I can honestly say that the only thing that should not happen is for the girl to get pregnant. But young people need to learn how to form successful relationships, and having sex is a fundamental part of the learning process. Are we missing out on that by operating from a place of fear? What do you think, Deborah?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think we have been having this discussion based on the notion that sex equals sexual intercourse, because we've jumped so quickly to pregnancy and disease and all of those things. Kids are having sexual experiences, not including those behaviors, like when did you have your first kiss? And kids don't just need guidance about sexual intercourse. They need guidance about how to approach this whole concept of physical intimacy with another person, starting, when these experiences or even before these experiences might occur. Also, I want to point out that if we strictly stick to sexual intercourse equals sex, we're leaving out the whole population of gay kids in our country, and they need lots and lots of guidance too. So how do we frame this in a sex-positive way while at the same time pointing out the potential problems and landmines that might be part of these experiences? What we have traditionally done in the U.S. is, I think, educate for no or not yet. We come from a negative, and my belief is that we need to change the paradigm and come from not teaching no or not yet, but teaching no, you're too young for that, to not yet, possibly when you're a little bit older, to yes. So we have to educate for yes, ultimately, because whether they're teenagers or whatever, they are going to have sexual experiences in their life. And so that our job as parents is to be a guide to, and this has been pointed out before, but we have to start way at the beginning by setting a foundation. So ultimately, what we need to be teaching our kids is not that sex is bad, not even that it's good, because sometimes it can be a disaster, but that sex is, in any form, is powerful.
And natural, of course.
And natural, and it's also powerful, which means, you can naturally learn how to ride a bike with guidance, but this bike riding isn't inherently as powerful as, for example, sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse, as far as I'm concerned, is just about the most powerful behavior on the face of the earth. It has the ability both to give life, potentially take life away, and certainly change any number of people's lives forever.
So
and
on
that
the
requires
notion,
a lot of preparation.
Deborah, on the notion of changing this paradigm of how we address sex and this kind of radical idea of teaching good sex and good and safe sex practices, along with the idea of doing it within your own home or allowing your children. That's sort of what we posed to our community in the beginning. And I wanted to read some of the responses. How does everyone feel about teenage, co-ed or same sex, if your teens happen to be gay, sleepovers? And 60 is the new 42 says teenage co-ed sleepovers, no way in hell. And then Mr. Stoner, to you, dude, could you imagine the parade of people on your doorstep? Quote, hey, Michelle's mom is having sexed up sleepovers. And then Chef Adam, son, yes, daughter, hell no, Cox, shotgun. So Liz, where do we stand on saying, yes, it's good and healthy, and yep, there's the door, go ahead?
Where's the middle ground?
Yeah, I'm so
ground?
much less concerned about parent-sanctioned sleepovers, or even how much sex, however we want to define that, our kids are having than if they're doing it safely. And something, that the blog post on the Huffington Post about these parent sleepovers that we were looking at before this segment talked about the Netherlands as an example of a country that is really high rate in terms of access to contraception. So teens have really easy access to it, and they're much more likely to use it consistently and effectively. And honestly, that made me a little jealous. I'd love to live in a culture where that the way in which they thought about sex would result in easy access to contraception for not just teens, for everyone.
And I want to talk about the access to contraception in regards to, and I know dads brought it up earlier, sons and daughters. Why do we want to treat our sons and daughters differently in regard to teaching them about sex? Because if they're having heterosexual sex, there's gonna be somebody's daughter in that mix. So we have to teach them the same way, don't we? What do you think, dads? John, I see you trying to jump in.
No, I was just going to say that, look, I know that children are going to do it, and I would like, quite frankly, because it would make it less icky for me, for the public schools to do a great job of teaching my kids. That's why we pay our taxes, and because the teachers taught them, and then I'll do the mop-up. My wife and I will, of course, provide the proper kinds of information that, I don't want to send my daughter out I don't want to send her into a knife fight into a gunfight with not a knife, but quite frankly with nothing, right? So I want her to be educated, and I want her to make smart choices, and I want her to be well informed. And I also know that think about what your life was like when you were in high school, and how you formed attachments to people, and how kids were gently cruel to one another, and then now and again it escalated, right? Now, imagine if you add in the volatile feelings that kids develop as it relates to increased amounts of sexuality.
Right.
We see that kids who find no problem posting pictures of girls topless on their Facebook pages that they took with their phones, right? That's stuff that your kid can never get back.
Right.
And the idea that we would have this volatile thing and we would be supporting it, I'm not saying that people are doing it cavalierly, because clearly they're not, but it gives me the kind of willies a little bit, because I want them, there's so much more to know. And it's such a hard thing, even for adults to be mature about. Now imagine...
There's more to know, John, but at that time, when you're a teenager, kind of the only thing you want to know is about sex at that time. And Mo, I see you trying to jump in, so what did you want to jump in with?
First, to say we got to be, I want to be the first one to have the conversation with my daughters about sex, not school. Like, they can mop up after me. But also, and we also be clear that we're still evolving in this country. The feminist movement is still growing. And so it is a double standard when it comes to our boys versus our girls when it comes to sex. And we have to keep doing the work to level that conversation, that playing field about sex. And that the boys, yes, because if you have straight children, they're going to be having sex with the opposite gender. And you need to make sure that they're respectful of each other.
Yeah,
That's still brand new in our society, to tell boys to actually be mindful and respectful of a girl as a whole human being when it comes to sex, especially in their early years, and it winds up in their adult years. And that's still something, again, we're still evolving and learning that.
Go ahead, jump in, Deborah.
I'd like to say that you have really put your finger on something that we as adults need to address very directly, and that is this double standard. We have to create a single standard for all genders based on the same core values, as you have mentioned, that we teach them to apply to every other important aspect of their life. Honesty, integrity, caring, thoughtfulness, responsibility, respect, compassion, decency. And we have to remember that our kids are exposed to images and storylines around them all of the time that do not portray those values. And it's up to us to make those connections. We tend to think that the values aspect of sexuality education is so controversial, but no, it isn't. Those are core values that I just listed that almost every adult I've ever met wants their children to connect to all their relationships. So once again, it's really about connecting life to sex and sex to life, because the same life lessons that we are giving our children around everything else apply to this subject. And this is what our parents are not doing and our schools are not doing, because they're not clear about what the word values means and how to teach their children about them. The second thing I want to say is I need to go on record here that parents really can't afford to take a pass on this and say, I'm not comfortable with that, therefore. Schools and families are not interchangeable. So I, as a sex educator, which I've been in schools in grades 4 through 12 for more than 35 years, have certain roles in students' lives, and parents have similar roles, but they're not the same. So I can help kids think through value situations and teach them how to think about that, but only you, as your child's father, can tell your child what you think and value as their parent. I can't do that in school. And I cannot tell you how much a vitally important part of the educational process that is.
We're going to have to wrap it up here in just 1 minute, but I want to read this last comment. Zev Hadash says, my parents were very progressive in certain ways, almost cool. They preferred I drink and smoke on the porch rather than behind the barn. But when sex came into the picture, they thought I was a virgin until I explained why a friend was staying over so much. And Liz, from just to kind of wrap us up here, from the teen perspective, is it about parents having a willingness to talk about sex openly and honestly for what it is and not just this scary thing that you just shouldn't do.
Exactly. I mean, I believe that no good can come from keeping any kind of knowledge from teens or kids. The second they want to know or they're curious, you should tell them. And I also just want to say, I wish all three of you could just parent all of our, like every teenager in our audience, because it's so refreshing to, honestly, to talk to parents who aren't afraid, you know, to use the word sex and like their kid in the same sentence. It's wonderful.
It is very refreshing and new. Liz, thank you so much for joining us here on set and in our Google Hangout, our wonderful panel of parents and experts, Deborah, John, and Mo. Thank you so much for joining us. And stay tuned for more conversations here on HuffPost Live.